everybody. My name is Zeta Seti with Green Rush Revolution. We are here at MJ BizCon Week at the International Cannabis Bar Association, Surrey, and I'm here with Chris, who's the Executive Director of the INCBA, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, man. It's great to have everybody back together again.
Absolutely.
And it's been so long. I mean, like so jazzed up. Everybody's so fired up. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, it's so incredible to see this together.
Yeah, we've been waiting for a long time. We're back in public, and obviously we have a great turnout here. And so I think the legal community, at least from our group, we have about 200 lawyers that are in town.
200 lawyers in town. From all over the world?
So mostly from the U.S. for at least this conference.
Sure.
Europe is still having some problem with our domestic COVID policy.
I know, right?
So our members are waiting, right? So they're sort of like, they're perched and they would like to come back soon. So we have members, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and so those markets that are getting up and running over there.
Yeah.
Germany just had an election, so things are changing there. They're ready for new policy.
I heard about all this. I know it's pretty amazing to see what's happening all over the world too, as well. It's just not the U.S., but all over the world, man.
Absolutely.
Like Germany, I heard about Germany doing that, and obviously, we could see some pretty big changes next year. You think?
Well, with regards to their program, they look to expand their program quite a bit, and so it's happening all over the world. No matter where we go, whether it's U.S. jurisdictions implementing sets of regulations, or countries across the sea. Out in Germany, Mexico, they're trying to set up their regulatory program. So we're seeing just states fall all over the world.
Right. So as we're seeing this happen, because there's too much demand and not enough experts, right? This is happening all over the place. INCBA, like strategic initiatives for, let's just say, 2022. What are we looking at here with the group?
Well, the core of what we offer is really a community for lawyers. We were founded in 2015 as the National Cannabis Bar Association, and what we offer is an infrastructure for lawyers that don't have sort of the background and the resources to be able to serve their clients adequately without sort of having that access to the industry, right? Without having that access to institutional knowledge around how transactions are executed, how we have to edit sort of daily business issues, like how you write a lease for a cannabis company is fundamentally different.
I know, right?
So, you just have to look out for those issues, and so that's what we do as an association is we try to educate our lawyers about how they can best serve their clients.
Right.
And so as we get back to it, we're excited to be back out in the public, and we're starting to have our in-person events again. Obviously, we have parties, we have CLEs, we have all that sort of stuff. So.
And I would imagine some of the conversations is just pioneering some of this cannabis law all over the place, and I was just talking to a bunch of folks about that. It's like and you think INCBA is could be the go-to source for governments around the world to help understand these pieces of regulations, or how
absolutely. And we have a unique perspective because our experts are dealing with clients that have to overcome these regulatory burdens every day. Sure. And so when we have we have a set of committees that are set up in order to address substantive issues, and so we have a legislative advisement committee.
Oh, nice.
So they track promulgations of regulations around the country.
Right.
Right now we focus primarily in the United States, but we track when regulations come out. We make comments on those regulations. We try to make it so the regulations at the state and federal level line up with what our clients are seeing and sort of the pain points that those guys are having.
Right. And I would imagine that that's helped with the specializations that you have in this whole consortium of legal minds, man. We have everything from litigation, we got M&As, we got patent attorneys that need to. We're starting to look at utility patents and things like that for plants and stuff. Are you seeing that happen with some of the attorneys?
Well, that's always what we've talked about as a bar association, right?
Right.
You have. If you looked at the practice groups of a traditional law firm, right, you have intellectual property lawyers, you have real estate lawyers, you have securities lawyers and finance lawyers. You have all those same lawyers in the cannabis industry. You just need an extra sort of layer of knowledge on top of whatever a traditional lawyer would need to know, right? And so if you're dealing with securities law, you're dealing not only with traditional blue state, so that's a state, or blue sky, which is a state level securities law, and then federal securities laws, you're also dealing with the issues of the federal illegality and how cannabis is regulated in a particular state. So you need to know the basic sets of law, you need to be that securities lawyer, and then you need to know an extra set of knowledge. In some areas, it's at the state and federal level. In some areas, like in real estate, you need to know the municipal, the county, the state, and the federal level, right? And so you start stacking those sort of sets of extra information that you need to know on top of those traditional practice areas. And that's what we do, right? So we take lawyers from, your traditional lawyer to someone that knows enough about cannabis to be able to tailor that type of work to the cannabis industry.
Yeah, and it's bridging, their professional, I guess, specialization into the cannabis industry, and then learning how to apply it in different pieces of the puzzle, I would assume too, huh?
Yeah, and so, it's the legal industry is it's a historic tradition, right? Like we have had laws are the basis of Western society,
Of
right?
course,
So lawyers have been around for a while, right?
Right.
The Magna Carta, there's common law forever, and so as we move forward into these new spheres, we have to bring those lessons from that history, right? And we bring those forward, and then we have to add this new set of things on top of it, and so. It's really in the legal tradition to start adding these pieces.
Right. So speaking of legal, since you're the executive director of this amazing consortium of legal minds, when do you think cannabis will legalize?
Oh, it's such a good question. It depends on whether or not we look at this as a sort of a piecemeal exercise or whether it is on a sort of all or nothing scale.
Sure.
So, of course, the CAO was an omnibus bill that was introduced earlier this year. It's a really interesting bill. It has some things that are much needed in the cannabis industry. So it has banking protections built into the decriminalization of it, so they don't directly address banking, but sort of one of the byproducts of that bill is sort of access to better banking and tax relief. They addressed certain areas. One of the interesting things they did was they created a new path through the FDA for cannabis products.
Oh, I didn't know. That's awesome.
And so they did try to address some of the problems that we have. So, one of the historic problems in the cannabis industry has been sort of FDA regulation, the opacity of what the agency is thinking.
Sure.
It obviously interrupts some business activity if you don't know whether or not the federal government's going to enforce certain rules or not. And so sort of that inconsistency has created some opportunity there, and I think that the CAO addressed a lot of those issues.
Right.
At the same time, we've also seen things like the Safe Banking Act get put into pieces of legislation that have to get passed anyway. So, the National Defense Spending Act is coming through Congress right now. The Safe Banking Act has sort of gotten put into that to see if we can, move it forward in other ways. And so, if you're talking about that piecemeal progress, I think that there are more opportunities. I think the CAO. The political expediency of that, we hope that maybe it's within the next year or so. I certainly don't think that it's passing by the end of the year.
Right.
Maybe in the next session.
Okay.
We always hope sooner rather than later, but
of course.
We're at a point where, it could be a year and a half and it could be 4. So.
Well, that's funny because everybody keeps saying 3 to 5 years. It's almost like every 3 to 5 years, everybody keeps saying 3 to 5 years,
Sure.
But, again, there's also legalization, full legalization, and then there's decrim, right? So do you think decrim could be sooner than legalization?
Taking it out of the CSA, again, we are the International Cannabis Bar Association, right? So we should take into account there are international treaties, right? And so there's the UN Single Convention on Narcotics.
Yeah, that was 1981, wasn't it? Or was that?
No, it's back in the 60s.
Oh, 60s?
Yeah, I can't remember the year, but it's been around for a little bit longer than that, unfortunately. But so the U.S. is a signatory to that, which means that if we changed our federal law, we would be in non-compliance with international law. So there's a few sort of issues that we need to figure out that are sort of procedural issues. But, again, those are sort of these road bumps, and the way that people feel is right, is that the cat's out of the bag, the train is out of the station.
Sure.
There's no way we're going to pull this back. And
no way.
While that is a speed bump, that is certainly not an impediment that's going to stand in the way of legalization.
It's also creating a lot of time to create opportunity for a lot of smaller brands who will become bigger brands and looking at exits and M&As. And so what do you think next year is going to look like, or the following years prior to, let's just say, legalization, let's say 5 years or whatever? I mean, are you seeing a lot of M&A activity in the space at all?
Well, we're seeing a lot of brand consolidation right now.
Consolidation.
So there's a ton of M&A. We are seeing a lot of activity. There's a lot of consolidation, like I said. That deal making has really ramped up over the last 6 months or so.
Okay.
And I think that we're going to continue to see that until we see full legalization, right? We're going through a stage in the market where really it's about boxing out as much market share as you can, in the hopes that when we do hit full legalization, you'll be well positioned to take advantage of it. And so I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. Banks are becoming more friendly. Of course, banks can bank the industry legally. They just have to be careful about it. And so we are seeing sort of banks dipping their toe into it. We're seeing, sort of mom and pop shops from the venture capital side really putting a lot of money into the industry. And so we're seeing a lot of activity, and I think that's going to continue into the future.
And then consolidation of brands like joining forces, or is it just like straight up acquisitions? Is it
it's sort of
all the above?
It sort of depends on where you are. And so in areas that are vertically integrated, right, you can sort of buy a few brands and box out those types of market shares. Like here in California, the vertical integration is a little bit more segmented, right? And so you might see integrations that try to pick certain areas on the vertical chain of commerce, right? So maybe a retailer that can combine well with a couple other sort of business areas.
Sure.
But really it's state specific because everything is based on state level regulation, and so you're looking at different opportunities in different states.
Okay, so speaking of states, what states do you think are coming up next, whether for medical or adult use? What do you think?
So, New Jersey's a big one. They are just ready. I'm not sure if they opened up their applications yet, but I know that they're poised.
No, they haven't yet. No,
they're poised to do that. So that's one.
Obviously, New York, Virginia.
I've heard a lot about Vermont lately.
Vermont,
just in the last couple days.
Interesting.
It seems like they have a pretty good model. I don't know much about it personally. Virginia seems like, I think that their adult use program is not coming online until 2024.
They want you open by 2020.
Yeah, so the medical program, again, being out in California, sometimes I feel a little bit cut off from those markets.
Right.
My understanding is that a lot of those jurisdictions are ready to go off.
Right, and I knew that when New York passed, right? Like I'm looking at it from the full scale, from ever since it left out of California, when New York passed, I feel like we're at the tipping point here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I didn't mention New York. I'm not sure why I didn't, but. In New York is an interesting case because, they've seen a lot of the mistakes that a lot of the other states have made, right? And so they've taken a lot of lessons that they have learned from California. They've integrated those lessons, and we're hoping that some of those things sort of start to make it back towards us, right? And so that this learning curve, as we see New York learning from some of the mistakes that we made in California and Denver, those start to sort of circle back around. And as we modify our rules, whether in California it's the tax issue, right, the multiple levels of tax that we face, or any of those issues, to sort of see them come home to roost.
Right, and I found it quite interesting with the state of New York. A specific license called a Small Business Adult Use Cooperative License. It reminds me a lot of the Prop 215 Medical Marijuana Collective, right? But it's at the scale of like a smaller scale where other folks can participate and still kind of have a license and kind of a plant-touching business, but maybe not necessarily have to have all this capital to really jump in and do that. I mean, that consortium of that, consolidation of those groups, I mean, do you think that's going to create a robust economy for New York, or do you think that's good for other states?
I can't speak to that specific license type. We see certain states like Oklahoma, right? They have very low barriers to entry, right? And so I think it's $2,500 for a license in Oklahoma.
Super saturated.
But you see a lot of competition there, right? And so it's a vibrant competition where people can get involved in the industry, right, if they want to. And so I think it does create those opportunities. One of the sort of interesting things about it is that we'd like to, especially here in Northern California, right? Like where I am, we're obviously in Las Vegas right now, but in Northern California, we see a lot of legacy brands. And so there's a lot of emphasis on sort of maintaining that mom and pop, farmer. In New York, you sort of see the same thing, but on the retail side, right? And so you could see, the idea of a bodega popping up, that's sort of a retail space that's maybe out of the norm, and that those coexist, with these sort of like large superstores in New York. And so I think that's a local economy that could really support, that variety in the market, where you have a segment that really goes towards that type of business, that coexist alongside these other types. So.
Quick question, what do you think the difference between, what do you prefer, lottery systems or merit-based processes? I gotta ask you this. What do you think?
My preference, obviously there are pros and cons to both. Anytime that you add discretion into a process, you ultimately, you give opportunities for people to take advantage of discretion, right? So that's a problem. That being said, I just don't, the idea of a lottery, that someone could get a license and that someone similarly situated, might have a larger commitment to the community, might have a larger commitment to social equity, might have a larger commitment to other values that we sort of want to see. Maybe they're in a better financial position, maybe they're more likely to succeed. I think that even adding in that piece of discretion, it's still important to look at these companies and, there's nothing, right? Some ridiculous number, like 90% of the businesses in the United States, fail, or it's like, and it's like, if you are awarding these licenses in generally an ultra competitive market to individuals that are not sort of the best place
operators
to succeed,
or be able to successfully,
it's hard, and it's hard watching somebody lose their life savings on a business that they truly love, that they really want to make work.
I know.
And maybe they're just undercapitalized, and when you have a lottery system, I think it just removes a little bit of the ability to say, and maybe that's paternalistic, right? So again,
but then also it's just being picked out of a hat, right? And another thing is a lot of folks are spending a lot of money in the beginning, so they got to be able to mitigate as much financial risk as possible in a lottery system, right? I think lottery would be good in a sub-tiered kind of system, but I don't know. I really, Arizona is a perfect example of that, right? Arizona's always been a lottery system, right? And look, people are going into the lottery. They're paying a lot of money just to do that, but they're also selling these licenses for somewhere between $20 and $30 million. I mean, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a legitimate question, right? Is that resale license market, is that something that is worth promoting, right? Is that something that is desirable for you to be able to resell one of those licenses where it's not merit-based, and just the fact that you won this lottery gives you this asset that's worth this astronomical amount of money.
It's crazy.
Is that something like, again, like the New York medallion market, right?
Right.
So it's like, that medallion on your cab, it's worth $1 million.
Right.
Or it used to be before Uber and Lyft, right? And it's like,
bad.
There's this own sort of mini market, and the thing about that market was that it didn't serve to protect consumers. It didn't serve to give back to communities. It didn't take any of these other values, right? It wasn't about sustainability. It wasn't about, the impact that we as a community and as an industry are making. And so, having that retail market for licenses, or, resale market for licenses, I understand wanting one of those. It would be great to win that lottery and get one of those licenses, especially if I had the money to build out one of these facilities and then turn around and sell the license. But, I wonder whether there's a way where we could promote maybe some values along with it.
And that's interesting because that leads it back to like the roadmap to the state. Because a lot of states that are out there, they don't even have a roadmap to be able to do this effectively. Is INCBA getting contacted to create any type of level of roadmap for states, or what does that look like a little bit?
States have a legislative process, right? So they have people that are drafting these bills. They have people that do it for a living.
Right.
So really, when we see states starting to draft this, they kind of jump into it head first. They call some consultants, and they usually hire people for money. We usually, get flagged that the process is going on, and then, we are always open to state governments. If they want to come and they want to talk to us, we one of the things we do is we've started to annotate state laws that we like and that we don't like. Right. And so, if you, as a government, have a particular policy objective, and you want to figure out what's the best way to get to this policy idea in your head, to it actually playing out the way that you like it without a bunch of unintended consequences, right? Whether that is the tax revenue piece or something else. There is a way that has worked and a way that it has not worked.
Right.
And we can help find that way where we've seen markets that have been implemented and actually achieve the policy goals that the legislators are going for.
Sure. And so, Chris, thank you so much. And as the executive director of INCBA and also the voice of this leadership, can you give our audience 3 key takeaways when they're trying to start a cannabis business in any state? What do you think?
Get a lawyer early. I know it seems expensive. Finding a good lawyer, can save you just so much money on the back end. And find someone that you trust, right? So don't pick someone, out of a hat. It is not like, it's not a lot like a lot of professions. You have to have someone that you can be upfront with, someone that you can trust, that you can tell the entire story to, that will give you good advice in return.
Sure.
So get a good lawyer and get one early. And then, make sure you have enough money.
Capital.
And I would say that the third one is stay true to yourself.
Stay real.
We're here because something drew us to the industry. Whatever that is, figure out what it is, what makes
Exactly.
you tick, and try to stay true to that. And if it's building community, build community. And
Love
if it's, making sure that the best possible product gets into the hands of the consumers, and
That's tested, that's safe, that's good,
There
that's
you go.
accessible. That's fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the
Thank
show.
you. Yeah.
This is Green Rush Revolution. My name is Ed Acetti here with INCBA. Thank you so much.